Hello everyone. My name is Aditi Sood, the core team member of Azure Developer Community. I welcome you all once again in our day 2 of the AZ-104 Bootcamp. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Okay, so now we have a great announcement for you all regarding the goodies distribution, and that will be discussed at the end. So, everyone, please stay tuned. So, without wasting much time, I would like to welcome our today's guest speaker, Mr. Ilyas F. He is Technical Program Manager and Startup Mentor at Microsoft. He is also the MVP at Microsoft. So, good evening, sir.
A very good evening, one and all. Are we good to go?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Thank you so much again for joining on a Saturday. There could be plenty of things, but you chose to join the session to upskill yourself on Microsoft Azure, and thanks once again for that particular initiative that you're taking. All right, so this is the second day of the Azure Bootcamp for 104, which is Azure Administration Certification. And in this content, we're going to look at the Azure Active Directory, role-based control, and then managing Azure subscription, as well as governance and compliance. So before we move on, let me quickly introduce all right, I can skip this part. I'll quickly skip it and move on to the actual content. So this is the checklist for today's content: Azure AD, RBAC, and subscription governance and compliance. All right. So before we jump into the content, if you have any questions around the topic that we're going to discuss today, or any general one around the certification of Azure, or in anything in general, keep the comment section active. Please post your question. Towards the end of the session, we will spend a good amount of time going through the questions, and I will try answering as much as possible. If not, I would suggest that you connect with me on LinkedIn or other social places, and I'll be more than happy to help you with this. All right. So the Azure 104 is primarily Azure Administration Certification, like I said in the beginning, which focuses mainly on roles that are very specific to managing Azure, right? If you look at Azure, it's a very broad set of cloud services offered by Microsoft, and the Azure Administrator role is expected to manage the workload, manage the subscription, keep a tab on security, and all of that, right? So hence the entire certification is, okay, let me quickly open the skills measure. Hopefully you can see my screen. So this is the skill measured for AZ-104. And what we're going to look at in today's session is these areas, the functional groups, and the functional groups. We're going to look at these topics. Azure Active Directory, RBAC, and subscription and governance. And apart from this, we also have storage, management of the storage, deployment of various services, configuration of containers, and so on. So these will be covered in the subsequent sessions that is going to be organized by the Azure community through this platform. All right, so without further ado, we could directly jump into the content itself, right? So under the Azure management of Azure AD objects, these are the various areas in which you are going to be tested, right? Basic understanding of Azure Active Directory. How do you manage the user's creation or the entire lifecycle of user management and groups management? And then administrative units is another feature of Azure. User and user group properties, device settings, bulk updates and management of users and groups, configuring Azure AD Join, and self-service password reset. So with that, let's get into the topics one by one. So Azure Active Directory is a cloud-based identity management, right? I hope many of you are coming from, maybe you're a student or early in your career. If you're completely new to Azure Active Directory, I would strongly suggest that you go take a look at the documentation that captures very much in detail. But in this 2 hours of session, what we're going to look at on a very high level, right? And then go over the areas in which you're going to be tested on the Azure certification. So it's a cloud-based identity that helps organizations to securely authenticate and authorize users, resources, services, both on-premise and on cloud. Excuse me. Sorry for that. I have a heavy cold, but I couldn't discontinue the session, so I'm trying to do this. All right, going back. Right. Right, so Azure AD provides both authentication and authorization. So on the right side, what you see is an on-premise setup where you have application servers, applications that might use the legacy authentication protocols such as Kerberos and NTLM, as well as on the Azure side, you have cloud native apps, Azure web apps, or Azure resources, which might use the open standards or modern authentication that includes SAML, OAuth, OpenID, and AWS Federation. And Azure Active Directory combines both of them and allows organization and enterprises achieve both user authentication and authorization. So on a high level, Azure AD, there are plenty of components, but we are touching upon the key concepts of Azure, right? So the first is identity, an object that can be authenticated, right? So this means a user who wants to authenticate against a particular service. And account, right? So as soon as you join a company, you would be given with username and password using which you could log into your email server or checking Outlook and all of that. So that's an account, right? And then Azure AD account, which is a service on cloud that would allow an enterprise to manage the users, groups, or all other services, right? So that's an Azure AD, and that's the service that we are now looking at. Now, Azure AD Tenant is a multi-tenant service that's offered by Microsoft. Now, as soon as somebody creates a subscription, and Azure AD Tenant is associated with that, using which the enterprises or companies can create users and groups to securely onboard accounts or manage resources within Azure, right? So this is a service, an instance of a service that's created by Microsoft for you when you're onboarding into Azure. And finally, Azure subscription. So Azure subscription means you're getting an access to the Microsoft cloud, and a subscription is basically a billing unit, right? Within which you can further create services, utilize them and pay for what you're going to use within Azure. So these are the fundamental, components or concepts that would come inside in your questions, right? So there might be scenarios around these concepts. So it's better that you go and understand this a little more in depth. The second piece that would come inside in the exam is the Azure AD Join, right? So Azure, domain services. ADDS refers to Active Directory Domain Services, right? In general, when enterprises or companies use Active Directory, they have existing application on premise, or you may want to log into your company's laptop using username password, right? And for that, we need something called Azure Domain Services, which can connect your offline application or application that is hosted on premise within your Office data center with the Azure Active Directory on the cloud, right? So this Active Directory Domain Services is the one which helps seamlessly connect the Azure AD versus the domain services or the on-premise Active Directory that sits in the on-premise, right, in the Office. So there will be a lot of questions around this topic. So I highly recommend that you go and understand this in a bit more. Managing via device setting. So how do we onboard devices into the Active Directory, right? So as soon as somebody joins a company, they might get some mobile devices or laptop, and how do we onboard them into Active Directory, right? There are multiple ways. One is using self-service, which is the out-of-the-box experience given by Windows. So you could use that experience. It's like a wizard. You touch, click and enter. That automatically joins your machine into the Active Directory. Or there is a Windows Autopilot mode is another setting that is offered that will also allow you to enroll your machines and mobiles automatically into the Active Directory. And third option is a bulk enrollment. When multiple people join an organization, there might be bulk of laptops or the detail that needs to be joined. So there is a bulk upload or enrollment option as well is available that would help us enroll bulk of the machine into the AD. Now, Azure Active Directory is a cloud service which comes in different editions and flavors. Again, this may not be a question in the exam, but it is good to understand when you step into an Azure administrator role in an enterprise or a company. It is good to understand what version of Azure Active Directory that your company has, because these versions are going to affect some of the features that is going to be there in the Azure Active Directory, right? There are free version, M365 apps and premium P1 and P2. And here you could see this matrix around what are the features available in each of the version. Again, there may not be many questions around this topic, but good to understand this. I'm not looking at the comments or question sections. If there's anything that needs to be answered, if you have any questions, please keep it posted in the comments, and I will take a look at it towards the end. All right, the next set of topic is going to be on user accounts management, right? So end of the day, the identity server or the Azure Active Directory is all about managing the lifecycle of the users, their accounts, how do we authenticate and authorize users within the cloud platform, right? Both on-premise as well as in the cloud, right? So the very first feature that we're going to look at is the user management feature that would allow the companies to create new users as well as manage the user lifecycle, right? So there might be, you may need to update the second name of a user. You may need to change the password of the user, or you may need to reset the password every 30 days or 45 days, right? Or sometime when the company, when the employee leaves the organization, you may need to remove the user from the organization Active Directory, right? So all of this can be done with the help of the user accounts management, right? We're going to do a bit of a demo towards the end of each section, but it totally depends on the time that we have at hand. So we're going to go through each section as quick as possible, and then we'll try and do a bit of a demo. All right. So that's about creation of the user management. So here on the screen, you could see management of the user, adding a new user, bulk operation, reset password. So these are the menus that's available. Now, whatever we are seeing on the portal is also available as PowerShell commands. Is also available as Azure command line interface. Right. So as an admin, we could also use those approaches to access and manage the user's lifecycle. The second functionality is groups, right? So if you think of a large organization, just imagine Infosys, TCS, right? So there are thousands of employees who works for the organization, and they may be from a different, divisions or subsections of the company, verticals, whatever you can think of, right? So it is going to be hard for us to manage the life cycle of a user as one single group, and that's where this groups come in that helps us to manage the users depending upon the businesses they depend they are part of or divisions they are part of, right? So we have two types of groups that we can create. One is security group, and another one is Microsoft 365 groups. So security groups are basically for applications that is going to be more of on-premise only, or application that's more for legacy protocols and all of that. And the second one is for application for both on-premise and on cloud. But this is more specifically for authenticating applications which is hosted on cloud, right? So be it Microsoft SharePoint-based application or Power Apps application, as well as custom applications, right? So for such applications, we would choose the Microsoft 365 groups, right? And the second type of, so once the group is created, we can then add users into the group. So for example, let's say we are trying to create groups for a banking customer. So we may have a group for, let's say, a transaction team or pre-sales team or finance team or sales team, and all of that. And then, as and when new employees join them, we could then assign members into the security group. And here, there are two types of assignment. One is assigned, another one is dynamic user. So assigned is basically kind of a static assignment. The second one is a dynamic user, where depending upon the properties or criteria of the user, so these users could dynamically assign to a particular group. So I'll give you a simple example. Let's say we are creating a group for South India, right? So there's a group, exclusively created for South India. Now, any user with the location of South India needs to be automatically assigned to a group, right? So such use cases can be achieved with the help of dynamic user. And the same holds true for dynamic device type also, right? So if this is for user assignment, and this is for device assignment, right? So just like user being part of a particular group, devices such as, let's say, mobile or servers or laptops of laptop employees of the company, those also need to be part of groups, or it can be part of groups. It's not mandatory that it has to be part of group, but most of the time enterprises want to group assets within the enterprise, right? And that's when we use this dynamic device group to automatically assign set of devices into a particular group. And why do we do this? Because managing each and every users would be so difficult, right? And hence we use groups to automatically assign any policies or changes and all of that. Moving on, the next feature is an administrative unit. So administrative unit is a feature that will allow us to create org units, kind of org units or organization unit within the company, right? So again, I'll go back to the same example that we talked about, an organization having multiple different divisions, right? And each of the divisions could be managed by a different administration team, admin teams, right? So let's say, I'll take the same Infosys example. Let's say Infosys America, Infosys India, two different teams. And they want to have a separate admin group for Infosys US and Infosys India. So for such use cases, we could make use of this administrator unit to separate these logical constructs. So once the role is in place, then we could give appropriate permissions and assign them to administrator unit. So once we have that in place, we could then add users or groups into the administrative unit. All right, so the next thing that we're going to look at is how are we going to create users or onboard users into the system, right? So users can only be created by a global administrator or user administrator of Azure Active Directory, right? Not everybody can onboard users or manage users into the system, right? This is much like when you join a new company, you have to send an email, or the HRs would send an email to that web team, and they are the one who would be onboarding new employee to the organization or remove an employee when an employee exists in the organization, right? And then we also have the user profile. We could upload the picture, job, contact, or any additional information that we want to manage as part of the users. And deleting user is also a feature where we could delete the user, and deleted users can be restored for 30 days. If we accidentally delete a user, we could still restore the users, provided that we do that within 30 days. And then the last one is sign in audit log information. With this, we could audit who's logging in, how how many times is somebody logged in, when was the last time somebody logged into the system, none of that. So we'll see that in the action in a few minutes from now. And here you could see a screenshot of the group accounts, where there is a group called MDM Policy, Texas owners, and here we could add users into the system. And there's also another feature called bulk user management, using which we could onboard or add multiple users into the Azure Active Directory in a given point of time, right? And this would be very useful when the organization hires or exits multiple employees or users at a given point of time, right? So it would be hard for us to use a PowerShell or Azure CLI to add them one by one. Instead, we could make use of a CSV and feed in with all the information about the employee, and then use a bulk create feature and onboard them at once. Managing guest accounts, right? So we talked about adding employees or users of the organization, but at times we also need to engage with contract users or employees for a short-term needs, right? Or let's say two different organizations are collaborating. Let's say Infosys is supplying software services to, let's say, Ford Motors. Now, employees of Infosys needs to manage the infrastructure of Ford. Now, we have a couple of options. Now, Ford could create user accounts for the TCS employees and allow them to use as Ford email identity, right? Or Ford administration team could also decide to invite TCS employees as guests into their Active Directory. In such cases, we could make use of Azure guest accounts, right? So with this, we could easily invite guest users from other Active Directory, right? And this could also be done by only administrator. Not everybody can do this. And then once in a while, the administration team have to manage or look at how many of the guest accounts are still active. If they're not active, it is their responsibility to remove it. The last piece of Azure Active Directory is self-service password reset that would allow the users to do self-service reset by themselves, right? So many times, not now, many organizations are enabling this feature by default just to avoid the tech support or the queues that gets generated because of this. But earlier, many organizations used to, create a form or give them a phone number to reach out to for resetting the username and password. But this is a native feature of Azure AD, using which somebody can do a self-service password reset. All right, so before we move on to the next topic, that is role-based access control, let's quickly take a tour of Azure Active Directory in the Azure portal. So before we go there, let's look at if there's any question right here. There seems to be a good number of questions. Is there any limitation? Okay. The Lord, okay. Is there any limit over the number of people that could be added in the group? As far as I know, no. But you still take a look at the documentation to see if there is any technical limits. What are Power Apps applications? So Power App applications are low-code, no-code application. Imagine you could quickly drag and drop, text control or drop down and quickly create an application yourself. So that's a Power Apps application. Sir, is there any limitation spectrum over the role selection? Not sure what you're asking for, but I guess your question is there any role selection? Again, it depends on how the roles are defined and what are the assignments or permission that is being given to a role. So we will look at this role piece in the RBAC section. And the next question is the same as AWS IAM. Yes. If you're familiar with AWS IAM, it's very similar, very similar. Of course, the capabilities differ from one product to another product, but on high level, yes, it is very much same. Can anonymous user be added to Active Directory? Yes, you could also add them as a guest user. Yes. If you don't delete user, it will be charged. It will charge. Yes. How will it be tracked if guest users do any malicious activity? So that's where this audit log comes in. Not just the guest user, all the users that are managed by Azure Active Directory. Azure captures the audit logs. It captures who does what in the Azure Active Directory, who logged in, how frequently they are logging in, from where they are logging in, when was the last time somebody logs in, and all of that will be captured, and it is up to the security administrator and Active Directory administrator to monitor and take actions. All right, going back. The next section is the role-based access control. Before this, we plan to go to Azure portal. So here we go. So this is my personal subscription, and here you could see all the services offered by Microsoft Azure. So it's a huge laundry list of services. But what we are now interested is on Azure Active Directory. So let's use Active Directory. Here we go. So this is the Active Directory blade, where I could see all the different feature set. Now what we are going to start with is the user management. And here you could see the number of users who are already onboarded, right? So prior to even going here, let's look at this one, right? So here you could see managing tenant. Managing tenant is nothing but the Active Directory tenant that somebody belongs to. And here I have created these many Active Directory instance or tenant, right? So you could create as many as you want, but it is generally advised not to create too many, right? So here, these are some of the organizations that I'm part of. I'll go back, and right now I am managing a tenant called Born on Cloud, and this is the primary domain. And it has got these many users, groups, application, and devices. So let's move on to users. And here there are menus that would allow us to create a new user, or we could also invite external users. So let's quickly go into a new user onboarding process. So it says create a new user in your organization, or you could invite a new user to collaborate with your organization. So that's exactly what we discussed about, inviting Infosys to support, food motors. So here is my domain. Usually, this is a primary domain that comes, when you create a new tenant, Azure AD tenant in Microsoft. But most of the time, enterprises would use their company domain here. So if we are talking about Ford Motors, it would be like fordmotors.microsoft.com, which can then be mapped to their, their domain, actual domain, like infosys.com and so on, right? So that is not something that we're going to look at it now, but let's add somebody named Chris. So let's say Chris has joined this company, and we want to onboard him. And here you could see we could generate the password. We could hard code some passwords, something like password at 123, or we could also auto generate the password, right? It would automatically generate the password, and we would share this to Chris. So as soon as this is created, we could share this information with Chris, and Chris can log in into Azure. The first time when he tries logging in, it would ask him to reset, because that's a hardcode password, so it will ask him to reset, right? Now, once he accepts the invitation and then onboards, he would start showing up here as a member, right? So here you could see there are guest type as well as member type. So what we just created was a member, right? Then we also looked at bulk operations. So we could do bulk create. We could download the CSV template. Sorry for that. So this is the template, and now we could go ahead and fill in the information. So these are the various columns where we can fill in the information about list of users whom we want to onboard, and save it, and then use the bulk import option, bulk invite option, or bulk create option. Basically upload the file here, and that will go ahead and create all the users into the system. And if there is an error in the CSV file, it will also throw the error to us, and we need to go back and correct that. And similarly, bulk invite, if there are bulk of employees from TCS who are going to support, Ford, they may use a bulk invite, or they would also use a bulk delete when multiple employees leave the organization at once, right? So these are usually comes as a question. So there might be questions around these topic as a scenario. A company like Contonso wants to onboard employees. They have 10 employees and they want to onboard. These are the options. Which one do you choose, and all of that. So you need to understand the different options available so that you can properly answer them, right? And we also looked at the audit logs. So here we could see, who logged in, when did they log in, and they could see all sort of activities. So these are the different activities somebody can do in the system, and we could monitor them. Again, these can be part of the questions again. So take a look at the various options that we could audit the users with. Deleted users, we talked about restore. I deleted some of the users and we could bring them back, right? And then the groups, we looked at the groups. We can create different types of group. Let's see what are the options available here. So like we discussed in the presentation, so we could create a security group or M365 group if the groups are expected to access applications that are more cloud-based. That's when you go for Microsoft 365. And then you could give a friendly name, and description is optional. And you could also assign owners of the group. So here, some of the users are present, so I could choose them as the group owner, as well as I can assign members when I create a group. Perfect. So that's a group management, and these are self-explanatory that you could see. Again, we have access reviews. Now, which group is doing what, and all of that. So spend some quality time on these areas. So these are the roles and administration, or default set of roles that comes along with Azure, and here it shows, what is my current role. So I'm a global administrator of this particular Active Directory. But if your organization has given a different role, such as co-administrator or contributor, that would show up here. We talked about administrative units. Administrative units allows organization to create the units of organization or sub-organization within the company, using which they could manage their users and devices within the system. Right? There are plenty more, but the time might not allow us to go through each and every one of them. So we'll skip the rest of them and move on to our back stuff. I'll quickly take a look at the questions once again. How primary and secondary domain server synchronization powered, which is part of the Azure AD sync. If you have so when you are configuring the AD domain join, not the AD, so Active Directory domain services, you could configure how frequently you want to do it, but you could also manually trigger the sync between them. Usually, the organization does it every minute or every 30 seconds and so on. Oh yeah, so there are plenty of PowerShell scripts out there that you can take a look. Just search for create users, bulk users, or users, PowerShell, GitHub. You will find a lot of scripts. How many owners can we choose? It's up to you. There could be more than one owners, but then it is always better to limit the scope that you assign, right? So can we add some restrictions? What are those restrictions that you want to have? All right, so keep the questions coming in. Let's move on back to the RBAC stuff. All right, so the next topic is going to be role-based access control, where we can look at some of this, right? Creating custom role or managing the lifecycle of roles within Azure AD, and then providing access to Azure resources by assigning roles and different scopes, and then interpret access assignment. Now, what is RBAC in a simple sense, right? So we have different principles. These are identities, right? You could replace this with your name, and you are part of some sales group, right? So this is who you are. And then you have different roles. You are given with, let's say, you are an admin of an application, or you are, let's say, in a simple application scenario, you might have admin and you could be a reader, you could be just a viewer. So it totally depends on what set of roles that your system has. Now, each roles might have some permission, right? So although you're a reader, but you're a reader only for certain objects or certain aspects of your application. That's where the permission set or scope is, right? This says who you are in the system and what can you do in the system and where can you do in the system, right? So that's the usual, the fundamentals of an RBAC system. And why we need Azure RBAC or in general RBAC? RBAC is basically built on top of Azure Resource Manager, and it allows us to segregate duties or roles that we want to do within a setup. And it helps us to follow least permission model, right? You don't make everybody admin. Instead, you only allow a person that they are supposed to do, right? Or you only allow assign certain role, which allows them to perform their job, right? So some of the concepts include service security principle. Security principle is basically an object. Extremely sorry. Security principle allows us to authenticate against resources, and then we have a role definition, a collection of permissions that lists the operation that can be performed, right? So if you're familiar with Azure Storage has got different set of permissions, right? Whether you can read a container, whether you can read objects or blobs inside the container, whether you can write it. So those are different set of permissions, right? And there is a scope around it, right? Although you are a reader of Azure Storage account, are you allowed to access all the storage accounts within a subscription or within a region? And that is defined as scope, right? And then attaching a role definition to a security principle or a user at a particular scope. A user can grant access to that role definition by creating an assignment, right? So here we have created a user, we have created a role, and we have set a scope, and then we need to assign this to a user. That becomes the user role assignment. And this is how a role definition would look like. Right? So there are default set of roles within Azure. The topmost is the owner, which is owner of this entire subscription, and he can read, write, delete, create, and all of that. And then we have contributor. Contributor is basically a subset of owner. Then he will not be able to create or manage users, right? He will not be able to assign user permission or role permission and all of that. And then we have several such inbuilt roles, but we could also go ahead and create custom roles, right? We are not restricted just with the built-in roles, but we could also create custom roles by ourselves. And then we could define the restrictions as you see on the right? So we can take a look at this in our demo, right? So here actions explains what this user can do. So basically what it does is it allows the contributor role to do any actions.
Sorry, yes, your no, sorry, your second screen is not visible. I got it.
So, all right, I'm sharing again. Is it visible now? Hope it is.
Yeah, it is visible. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, no problem. Okay, so here we can see the JSON structure of the permissions. So for a contributor role, so this is how it usually looks, right? So it allows the person who has the contributor role to do any action, but not actions highlight what this person or role cannot do, right? So basically says this, you can do all of this, but not this. at the same time, data actions, what is allowed and what is not allowed, right? So we can take a look at this in the demo section. The role assignment part again, right? So we have the different security principle, a user, a group of users using user group, and then we can also create a service principle. Service principle is basically an object without a user persona. So usually a daemon app, right? An app that wants to perform something on behalf of a user, right? And there are different set of role definition, and then we assign a role to a particular user, right? So this is the user and role assignment, right? And we could do that for against a user, or we could also assign the role to a group, right? Like what you see here, right? So we could assign a contributor to a marketing group. And the scope in which we apply this goes something like this, and we would see this in much more depth in the subscription management or the subscription management section, right? So within Azure, we have something called management group, which is a combination of one or more subscriptions. And then inside a subscription, we can have one or more resource group, and within the resource group, we can have the resource. Now, when we assign a contributor role to a user, we could assign that contributor at any of these levels, right? And thereby we restrict what a user can do and cannot do at what scope. Hope this makes sense. I'll move on. So providing access to Azure resources by assigning roles at different scope, right? So once we have the roles and users in place, then the next thing that we have to do is assign a role to a particular user at some resource group level. So we can go to Azure Active Directory and we can choose the roles and administrator to see the list of available roles in the Azure portal. And then we can select a role, and then we could find, we could also make use of the filters like you see here, and then figure out the roles that we want to assign. And then we can say add assignments. Assignments is basically saying which particular filter or set of assignments that you want to do. And then we choose the user and assign the role to a particular user, right? So these are the different set of default roles available in Azure. The very first one is a owner access. He's a global, as the name suggests, it's an owner of the entire subscription. He has full access to all the resources, and he can also delegate access to others. That means he can also add user into the system, or he can also create co-administrators into the system, which is very much similar to owner. So that's the delegation part. The second set of role is called contributor. It's almost like owner, except that he can't create users, or he cannot grant access to others. Reader views Azure resources. He cannot create, he cannot delete, but he can simply view what's there in Azure subscription. And then there is an exclusive role called User Access Administrator. It's the primary role of this particular, or the primary job of this role is to manage the user lifecycle. So he's the one who's going to add user, delete user, create group, assign group, or manage the entire lifecycle of it. Again, there'll be a lot of questions around this particular topic, right? So there could be plenty of scenarios given to you saying you have a so-and-so company, and you are a user, so let's say you are a contributor, and you're trying to add users or delete users, and you're receiving an error. How do you solve the problem? And the way you solve the problem is you become user access administrator, because as a contributor, you cannot grant access or something like that, right? So you may have several such situations, scenarios given, and you need to answer such questions. All All right, so that's our back. Now let's go back to the Azure portal and play with it a bit. So we left right here, and now we can go back to. So let's look at some of the accounts. Yes, let's say I'll directly go to one of the storage account here, and here you could see the access control. We could also access this type from the Azure portal as well. But this is a much better way, or I see this is an easy approach to go. And here you could see, you can see what is my access level, right? So I'm a service administrator, and here you could also see the various role assignments, right? And here you could see all the users that's there, and we could also go ahead and add a role assignment. Okay, so let's say I want to make somebody as a owner, so I can choose this and then go to the members, and here I can go pick a user. Let's say we have Chris. We just onboarded this person into the company, so I'll go ahead and select that person. I can also make more than one person as an admin. For example, I have another user called Ilyas. I can also choose that and make them as the owner that we want to do, right? And we could also have managed identity, right? Managed identity is a key service that allows us to manage the identities automatically, right? We could also do that. So in this case, I just want to add both of them, and usually it is a better best practice to have a description as and when you perform any action in the system. And then you go ahead and review what you're trying to do. So in this particular case, I'm giving a scope. This is the role that I'm trying to assign for these two users. And the scope is at this level. So subscription at this particular, this is my subscription ID. And I am picking one of the resource group on this one. And then I'm giving scope at a storage account level, right? Now we could also do this at a subscription level as well, right? Now, as soon as I review and assign, it will go ahead and do it, right? Because I'm a owner, I'm able to delegate to other users in the system, right? And here we could see the default set of roles, owner, contributor, and we could also see the various assignments. So as an owner, these are the various permissions that I've got, and look at it. There are about 12,000 permissions, right? But then when you want to create a custom role, you don't provide all the permissions, right? Remember we talked about the least privilege model. So you need to pick and choose the privileges or permissions that is necessary for the user to perform, right? Nothing more, nothing less. And here you could see the JSON structure. So usually it's at a scope, the ID of it, and then what is the name of the role and a description, and assigned scopes at what level that we are going to apply, whether it is a subscription level or resource group level. And then the permission set. And here you could see we're going to allow this particular role to perform everything, but not this action. What are the data actions and what are the not data actions, right? So that's how the usual structure of the assignment. And here you could see to whom we have assigned this particular role with. And here we have assigned Chris and a few more users. Right, so that's all the role is. So you could take a look at all this, and both from a certification point of view, as well as when you get into an organization as an Azure administrator, it is very important that you keep in mind that Azure allows you to manage the Azure subscription or the security of the Azure resources in a very fine-grained approach, right? So that's what the enterprise security is all about, right? And you do that all with Azure AD authentication, and using RBAC, role-based access control, you manage that very fine-grained. All right, so that's our back, and now let's go back to the topic to continue with the rest of the one. So the way we apply RBAC authentication is we create a different set of roles, such as the global admin or application admin and all of that, which is part of the Azure Active Directory tenant. Right? We then create the roles, Azure RBAC roles, like owner or contributor, and we then assign them at different scopes, right? So here you could see we could assign that at a root management group level, or a management group level, or subscription level, or the resource group level, right? It's always best to reduce the threat surface or the area of access that you are permitting to somebody. Always look at what's the least permission or least level of access that you could give for some user to perform their job. And it is always important to audit who's doing what at an organization level and see if somebody is exceeding or if somebody is performing something that he is not supposed to, he or she is not supposed to do, right? That's part of your security and compliance. All right. So now moving on to the next topic, which is managing subscription and governance. And before we move to this topic, let me take a quick look at the question and see if there's something that interesting to answer. Okay, we'll start from here. Can you please tell me any real-time use case where roles assigned or permissions are given to the user? Okay, I think the question is why assign roles to a user, not a group? Usually it is at the group level for enterprise use cases, but if you're doing some testing, test cases, you may want to try that assigning to an individual, but otherwise you may assign them to a group. I mean, the admin stuff or the higher privileged roles would always be assigned to a one or two users, right? You may not have 5 or 6 people made as an admin. Again, it depends on the scenario, right? So it totally depends on the company's requirements. So if there are more people who wants to do the administrative work, then it is better that you create a group and then assign a role against a group. But if they are an individual, then there is no point in creating a group. Rather we could assign them directly to a user. Does user access admin can only add or delete users or resources? Yes, that's their business, that's their job, and hence this role. But again, if the same user is also expected to be a owner or a contributor, we could also assign them assign the other roles, right, that we saw. Right? But again, it totally depends on the organization, right? If you're, let's say, a startup where you are the only Azure admin, you may pretty much do many things by yourself. But if you're part of a large organization where you have multiple different personas or roles, where you are clearly segregating who is supposed to do what, then in the case you may have a separate Azure Active Directory administrator whose job is to manage the lifecycle of the users, security and all of that, and then it is access administrator. Different services. Well, yeah, this is always the case, right? So we have, enterprises have one subscription, right? They may have multiple different subscriptions, but it is always the case that they use one subscription to host multiple applications. In such cases, you may restrict the users at a resource group level. Right? Specific permission to each user as the kind of task we want. Specific permissions to each user. No, you assign permissions to the roles and then assign roles to the user. That's how we usually do. Okay, how can we define a custom role? Yes, custom role creation is similar to the predefined role, but there is a screen through which you can create a custom role as well. Again, if time permits, we could quickly go through that as well. Is this session? Yes, it seems like topic and complete the challenge that we see by the end of the session. Okay, I think that's specific to the session. So I'll go back to the presentation and we'll move on to the managing subscriptions and governance. All right, so managing subscription and governance under this topic, you may have all these subtopics that includes managing and configuring Azure policies, resource locking, and Azure resource tagging, managing the resource group, managing subscriptions, cost, and configuring management group. Azure policies. Why do we need Azure policies in the first place? Azure policy allows us to create, and as the name suggests, it helps us to create a policy, right? And the policies could be many things. Some of the use cases that you see on the right side, allow resource type, specify the resource type that your organization can deploy, right? Think about a situation where you're a global organization, but let's say you don't want your employees to create resources in the data center, let's say Russian data center. I don't know whether there is an active data center in Russia, but for the sake of argument, let's say you don't want your employees to create resources other than a specific region that your organization would want to have your resources with. Allowed virtual machine SKUs. If you look at the virtual machine, it costs differently for different sizes of the machine, right? But as a company, as an organization, if you have decided not to allow your employees to create anything beyond 8 GB of RAM, right? For whatever reasons, right? For the cost reason, for the optimization reason, all of that, you don't want to allow your employees to create virtual machine SKUs. Right? In such cases, you can create a policy that will allow us to monitor the existing set of resources and report us the virtual machines outside the size of the SKUs that we allow as an organization. Likewise, allowed locations, right? So we talked about it, right? We don't want your employees or users to not create resources outside of your homeland. So that's where we could use this policy. Sorry for that. Again, there are hundreds of different reasons why enterprises wants to use policy. So basically, we have some conditions that we want to meet, and hence we could create an Azure policy. It's basically a JSON description through which we could define, what are the do's and don'ts in a given subscription, right? And then we could run this policy and we could scan our entire environment and see how many of the resources are in a compliant manner. Right? Again, remember, we are not going to stop somebody from deploying something on a non-allowed location through policy, right? Because the policy is going to monitor the resources post something is done, and then we are going to report it back to the administrator. And the administrator and the organization have to figure out what to do with that, right? You want to remediate, you want to delete those resources, or you want to let the owner of those resources to move those resources to some other compliant locations, right? And that's where these policies are used, and usually it is very challenging for managing resources on an Azure scale, right? Let's again, if you're working for a global organization with offices in multiple locations, you have development team or R&D team sitting across. It's always hard to manage all these resources in a compliant manner, and hence this Azure policy, can support in such environment to monitor and make sure that we are compliant against the organization's security policy or compliance policy. So in order to create policies, we first need to create a policy definition, right? So policy definition, just like the RBAC JSON definition, it's a JSON one that is going to tell you, what somebody can do and cannot do. And then you can also say either audit or deny something be outside of a compliance, right? So here, as you could see, we could simply audit, or we could also deny, right? Deny could be a hard thing because by such policy, you may restrict the user from not creating a compliant, resource, right? But it is up to the organization. So if they want to take a hard measure, they could, of course, do that. So they could also stop somebody from creating a VM which is not compliant as per the organization policy. We could create initiative definition, a collection of policies that are tailored to achieving a singular high-level goal together. That is ensuring the PMs meet standards, right? So we could also create bunch of definitions, right? So that's called initiative. Under one initiative, we could have multiple different policies that meets the necessity, compliance requirement, security requirement of the organization. And finally, we could scope the initiative definition to a particular scope. So you could do that at a subscription level or resource group level or the management group level. And finally, we could determine the compliance. Again, we're going to look at it in a short while. All right, so we're going to look at the create policy definition by doing that in the Azure portal. Let's go back here. So yesterday I was searching for it, so it is handy here. So this is the policy blade, and here you could see overview, where you could see the policies that are compliant and non-compliant and all of that. And here we could also see the compliance against the date. Right? Usually companies would look for green everywhere, compliant everywhere. But at times, not all the resources might be compliant against the policies that we have that we have set. So how do we get started? So here we could see a different set of policies, assigned policy, access compliance, and all of that, and recommended policy statements, assignments. So Microsoft, based on the resources that we have, Microsoft recommends the policies that might be helpful for our organization. So we could inherit from this particular policy is all about inheriting tag from a resource group. We're going to look at what a tag is, but this particular policy allows us or monitors or inherit a tag from the resource group, right? So here we could look at how the form is going to be. So we could choose a scope. So here we could choose a scope at some subscription level. So here I have a couple of subscription levels called Visual Studio Enterprise. Another one is sponsorship. So I can choose Visual Studio Enterprise. And then I could also restrict or filter a particular resource group, right? If that is optional. So I can select at this level. And I could also set some exclusions, right? The exclusions could be what is, of course, the resource group, or I could also add additional, scope. For example, if there are few resources or resources within this resource group, I could also set exclusion. So basically saying that apply or inherit a tag, but do not do that at this particular exclusions. The name of the assignment and then some description, and immediately enable the policy enforcement assigned by so and so person. And here set of parameters. Here we could also give a name. Remediation. So when something is not able to inherit, or when a resource under resource group doesn't have a tag, how do we want to remediate, right? So we could create a remediation task, which is inheriting a tag from a parent resource group, and it could be something else as well. So this is basically, as the name suggests, how do you want to remediate a particular action. When there is no compliance, what is the message that you want to add, right? So what do you want to show? So you could also show that, add that message, and finally we can review and create. I'm not going to do that because I have one already in place, so we can take a look at that. So here I have inherited tag from resource group, right? So when there is a resource without a tag under a resource group, this would go ahead and copy the tag from its parent resource group, right? And I also have another one called allowed location. Now, how are we getting it? These are available as ready to use, right? So there are plenty of examples that Microsoft has. Here you have a lot of general ones that you can simply copy and or use it as not allowed resource type. So this was one of the use cases that we saw for the policy. If your organization doesn't want to use some of the resources because you don't have a business with it or it's very costly, and there could be hundreds of different reasons why you want to not allow your employees to do it, right? So you could define such policy and then disallow your employees to not use or not create such resource types within the subscription. Audit usage of custom RBAC rules, right? So this is another policy that you may use, allowed location, and all of that. So the point of this is there are plenty of policies that's readily available that you may use. And then you could also look for community contribution. You could see, you could search for GitHub where you will find a lot of different other samples by community people as well. The next tag is the compliance. Now, once you have the policies defined, so here is where you see how many of them are compliant. For example, this allowed location, they are not compliant. Let's look at what has happened here. So allowed location, and what are the locations that I'm allowing here? Right. So here I have said I want to only allow resources to be created in South India, but then many of the resources are outside of South India. For example, these two resources, and they are not compliant, hence it is showing error, right? So as an auditor, you may look at these and then go back to the owner of these services and get that addressed, right? So that's the primary purpose of Azure policies. Remediation, as we talked about, is basically to how do we want to remediate a particular non-compliance, right? So when a resource does not have a tag, whether we want to automatically inherit from its parent tag, let's say when a resource is outside the compliant location, do we want to remove the service by ourselves? So those are remediation, right? So you could create remediation tasks to perform all those functions. And as and when something happens, we could also subscribe to the topics here. We could let's see what is right here. Okay, so here, as you could see, when something happens, we could make use of event grid system to subscribe to changes that's happening inside the compliance or policy, right? So let's not go deeper into this. That's about Azure policies, and there will be significant, enough number of questions around this topic. So I would strongly suggest that you go take a look at it. Right. So many policy definitions are available, like we saw, and then you could also find policies in GitHub, and it's basically a JSON format, and it's a policy definition defined in a JSON format that you can take a look. So we looked at the group policy. Okay, we didn't see the create initiatives. Let's go look at that as well. Getting started, compliance, where did we see? Initiative, assigned initiative, right? So here we could also create an initiative. So initiatives are basically one or more policies clubbed together to address certain, non-compliant stuff, right? So we can also do that with the help of initiatives. Right? So in this particular example, we have chosen one of the location, and then we have multiple, policy definition, as you see, naming policy definition, region policy definition. So it's basically clubbing one or more policy as in one initiative and making sure that our resources are compliant. So here we have the assignments and assign initiatives, and we could assign that to a particular region or at the here there is a name called East region, and we are assigning that to a Visual Studio Enterprise. We also looked at the compliance stuff. This is the dashboard that auditors or security folks would look at. In fact, Azure AD administrator or Azure administrators as well, because they are the one who's responsible to make sure that all the resources created within Azure are compliant enough as per the compliance policies of the organization. So we looked at this, assigning a policy, create and assign an initiative definition, checking for the compliance and checking for remediation tasks. So another thing that I would like to highly stress upon is having enough hands-on, because in the question there would be situations around how would you go about assign a policy for a company, right, in a given situation. So they would give you screens with a set of actions that you need to do one by one, right? So they would check the order as well. So have some hands-on and make sure you remember on a high level at least, right? So you don't need to remember each and every screen or options that you choose. At least on a high level, in order to assign a policy, you need to have a policy in place. You will assign a policy at a given scope, and then you will go and look at your compliance and you want to remediate, right? So this is a high level task, and make sure at least trying this a couple of times so that you remember before your exams. All right, so I'll go back to the screen to check if there's any question. Okay, nothing major, so I will go back. Logs. Logs is a simple and effective feature that helps us to, as the name suggests, basically lock the resources, right? Accidentally, we may delete, or if you have some resources on Azure, others might delete it, right? And hence, we need to lock it so that others would not accidentally or knowingly delete those resources, right? With logs, we could lock at the subscription level, resource group level, or even at a resources level. And log restrictions also apply to all the users and roles within Azure. And as you could see on the right, we have a subscription for a marketing team, and they have a couple of different resource group. One is for a DB resource group, and one more resource group with their application. And we could lock them. And with locking, read only allows authorized users to read a resource, but they cannot delete or update. So this is one type of lock, read only lock. And there is one more lock called cannot delete lock. So this is the one that I was talking about. So this is to disallow somebody from deleting your resource group or resources or subscription, right? Logs are inherited from the parent scope. So for example, if you have set a log at a subscription level, the resources under them would also inherit the logs by default. So before we talk about the tags, let's quickly go look at what is a log and how we could make use of them. So let's say I have some resource group. This is my personal storage account, and here you would find where is lock. So here I could add a lock name do not delete lock. And here, as you could see, we could define read-only lock or delete lock. I want to go for delete lock. So this way, this lock is now set, and it is applied at the scope of a storage account, right? So you could also do that at a resource group level or the storage account. So this is set at a storage account level, but you could also set at resource group or subscription level. So here I could say this is my resource group, and here I could set. There is one at this scope, but I could also add at resource group level. So by setting at this level, automatically all the resources under this resource group would inherit the logs. So that's pretty much it about the log. Although it is a very simple feature, but this is a very highly effective and very important feature for us to secure our resources within Azure. The next piece is tags. Tags, again, it's a simple feature, but they're very much important from a security, compliance, as well as a cost aspect, right? So it's basically provides a metadata for your Azure resources. Because Azure will be used all across the organization, there might be multiple teams using the same organizations, same resource group and all of that. It would be hard for the administration team to understand who's using what, who manages what, who is responsible for paying the bill of, let's say, one of the database, right? And hence, Microsoft recommends Azure users to make use of tags for the compliance, ownership, as well as the billing aspect, right? So using tags, we could logically organize resources into a taxonomy. This way, we could say all the resources from a finance division need to have a tag that says department finance, department sales, right? So we could use tags to manage the resource taxonomy. It's basically a name-value pair, and then very useful for rolling up billing information, like I said. And it has a limitation, 512 characters, and that is more than sufficient for naming our resources or tagging our resources. And storage accounts has a special restriction, that is, it can only contain up to 128 characters. Right? So before we move on to the resource group, let's quickly look at the tags piece. So like we discussed, it's basically a name value pair, right? So here, let's say division, and I say personal, right? Could not save tags for, please correct any errors. Okay, looks like some tagging policy or something that is preventing. I will go to something else. Let's go for this and tag division finance apply. Disallowed by policy. Okay, some policy is at the subscription level, which is not allowing me to do, but you go ahead and give it a try and see how it works, right? So once we have enough number of tags assigned, and we should also recommend all the users of our Azure subscription to do this. I remember in one of my previous organizations, we follow this very stringently to make sure all the resources has owners. So there will be a tag owner, and it will say so and so organization, right? But and so organization, right? This is how we manage who owns the particular resource. So that's about tags, and we'll go back to the resource group stuff. Resource group, as you know, so this is the building block of managing resources within Azure. On a high level, we have a subscription. Under the subscription, we can create resources. And the resources have some life cycle, right? Typically, we have an application which consists of, let's say, which is hosted on a VM, and then there is a backend database, let's say it's a SQL server. And both of them are created or deleted or upgraded together. In such case, you put them into a resource group. It's basically a bucket, a logical grouping, which adds one or more resources. And then you launch it. When the job of the resources are done, you go ahead and delete the resource group. You don't delete the resources individually or one by one. Instead, you delete the resource group. Sorry again. Resource group also allows you to manage or keep a segregation of applications, right? So a common you may have one subscription which is being used by multiple different departments or teams within a company, right? One team might be responsible for hosting mobile application, another one for API or something else, right? So resource groups allows you to segregate. There are different teams or different section of your organization, as well as manage the lifecycle, create, delete, or update them, as well as apply securities or compliance, right? So that's when we use resource group. Billing unit that aggregates all costs under. Okay, so we're now talking about Azure subscription. Azure subscription is basically a billing unit, right? Sorry. When you're, let's say when you want to use Azure resources, the very first thing that you need to have is the Azure subscription, right? What is Azure subscription? It's basically a logical way to charge you as a customer, right? So you need to get a subscription. Then once you have a subscription in place, you can then go ahead and launch, services, right? Resource groups contain all the associated resources within your Azure, and then we have Azure Active Directory, which act as an access control authentication authorization mechanism. So we also have a billing admin is one of the role. Billing admin's primary role is to make sure the cost part of it, right? So he's the one who will be able to see the charges or cost that is accrued by the organization, and we could assign billing admin for a different subscription or resource groups as well. Now, how do we get Azure subscription? There are different ways in which we can get Azure subscription. One is called enterprise agreement. This is primarily for the large enterprises customers, where they agree with Microsoft. This is basically a contract between the company and Microsoft. Because they have a huge expense or usage, they get some monetary benefit, some discounts. And this is one way of getting Azure subscription for companies. And then they could also go, companies can also reach out to resellers. There are resellers available. So what they do is they buy Azure subscription from Microsoft in a bulk, right? And then companies who want to use Azure, they could go to the resellers and they can create a subscription for the small companies. So this is another approach. Partners can design and implement Azure subscription, Azure Cloud Solution as well. So there are different partners like Infosys, TCS, and they could also give Azure subscription. And finally, if you're a small company, if you don't want to go through all of these ways, you could also swipe your card and get Azure subscription activated right away. All right. So with free subscription, you get a $200 credit for the first 3 months and free limited access for the 12 months. You have a pay-as-you-go model, charges you monthly, and then CSP, which is basically a cloud solution partner, and this is being typically used for small to medium businesses. Right? We talked about the enterprise model, largely for multinational or large enterprises. And there's a student subscription type of subscription. It includes $100 for 12 months, and they have to verify their student access. Right? And in case if you're not able to afford any of this, for example, many students might not have credit card, because of which they are not able to get a subscription. Try joining such initiatives, and they used to we used to run meetups where we distribute free subscriptions. And one more option that I know of is the Sandbox options available in Azure. If you go to MS Learn Docs, you will find Sandbox, where you could try various services of Azure with a limited time frame. Right? So, for example, if you want to try Azure SQL database, you can look at Sandbox for SQL, where it allows you to try SQL database for about 4 hours, if I'm not wrong. So there are various opportunities for you to try, hands-on with Azure Cloud. The last part of the content is about cost management. There'll be a fair number of questions, but it's not too challenging to answer, right? So there's a cost management aspect or feature of Azure that allows enterprises to monitor how much they are spending, which particular service charges more or costs more, which resource group, which subscription costs more, and all of that, right? So this will be very useful for enterprises to track and monitor how much they are spending on cloud, because without understanding where they are spending, they'll not be able to optimize it, and hence it is important for them to know. And this is the cost management feature which allows them to do that. And before we go to the cost savings part, let's quickly look at the cost calculator, or cost management and billing. All right. All right, so here we could see that I've chosen the scope as Visual Studio Enterprise. So you need to choose which particular subscription we are targeting. So we could look at it from a subscription point of view, or we could also look at from a management group. So management group, as I talked about earlier, is group of subscriptions together. And here you could see the cost analysis. This is a preview feature, so we will look at this one. Again, I may not have enough data because this is my test bed and I don't use the subscription that much. But here you could see on a high level, what is the charts that you get, what are the data that you see, right? So here you could see the spend by service name, service tier, and all of that, and where are you spending most. All my services are in East US. Which particular resource group spends more, and all such information. And this is very much flexible, and you can also download this data as CSV or Excel, and you could play with it by yourself. And then you could also set cost alerts. So from an exam point of view, these might be some of the questions. So how do you go about setting cost alert? Budgets. How do you set budget, right? So cost alert, as the name suggests, you could set a cost alert as and when you go beyond, let's say. So here you could set monthly billing amount, and when to when, and what is the minimum amount that you want to set as a budget. When the budget exceeds, you can set an alert to the administrator of the Azure portal, right? And as and when you receive such an email, you can go and take action, right? So that's about Azure cost management and billing. So here you could see the payment method. Again, as an admin, you are expected to manage all of this, and hence you'll be checked against these topics. The final topic is the cost saving. This is also an area where you'll be tested a lot, because Year on year, the overall spend by enterprises on cloud are increasing. Hence, companies wants to reduce their cloud spend. As an admin, how would you support their cost optimization initiatives, right? And these are some of the ways you could do that. Azure Reservations helps you save money by prepaying for services, right? So you could buy reservation. Reservation is basically a very simple topic that, let's say, you forecast your company to use hundreds of VM of this size on this particular region or globally. Then you could reserve that particular size or particular region, and based on your reservation, Microsoft gives you some discount or they reduce your price. Right? That's called reservation. Azure Hybrid Benefit is for those who have bought licenses, right? Banking customers and enterprises who usually purchase SQL license or Windows Server license, those customers can also use the same licenses on Azure. And when they do that, they also get a price discount on their Azure usage. Azure Credits, this is primarily for dev and test. Customers who are developing applications on cloud can get Azure Credit as well. Lastly, region. Every region is different. Their pricing is different. For example, if you compare, let's say, S1 size of a VM on East US versus India region, there will be a price difference. Right? So it is advisable to look at the cheapest region if possible, because not many enterprises will be able to use this. Because when they build an application, they may know already where exactly they want to host it. Right? If the customer base is North America, they may not want to host an application on China region or Japan region, right? However, if you have that flexibility of choosing the region just because of the cost, you could do that as well. Pricing calculator. If you search for Azure pricing calculator on the internet, you would see a very nice utility where you can check how much each of the services cost. Right? So that way you could do an informed decision. TCO calculator compares the cost of cost savings between on-premise and TCO calculator. Again, there's a utility from this. So you could compare, if an organization is planning to compare between on-premises versus Azure, using this tool, they could compare how much it would cost to run the same services on cloud versus on-premise. So this is primarily the Azure hybrid benefit. When you take a VM, let's say Windows VM or a SQL VM on cloud, there are different ways, right? One is by default it comes with license included, whereas the price will be on a higher side. You could also use the Azure hybrid unit. That means if you have SQL Server license already used in on-premise, you could also bring that to cloud. Thereby, you could save some cost. Or you could club both Azure hybrid benefit or reusing your existing software license along with reserved instance. Thereby, you could achieve a lot more saving, right? So from an exam standpoint, you may have questions on these, right? They would give you a scenario like in terms of they have on-premise licenses and they are looking at optimizing their workload on cloud. And as an admin, how would you save the maximum possible for this customer? And in such case, the answer would be making use of Azure RA, reserved instance, plus Azure hybrid benefit. Finally, Azure Management Group. I was talking about this management group. Management group is basically a logical object which combines one or more subscription or one or more management group as well. Why does it require? Large enterprises, they choose to go with different subscription for different teams or different groups within the company or different businesses within the company. Think about Tata Group. Tata is a large global conglomerate. They are into multiple businesses. Now, if you're an Azure admin, and if you have to take a decision of how do we manage the subscription for each of the groups within the company. For a steel group, Tata Steel You may have a separate management group under which multiple subscription for each of the division within the Tata Steel, right? Likewise, Tata Textiles, Tata software, and other businesses, you may define multiple different subscription and group them as management group so that you could define compliance as well as you could manage the billing aspects. And this picture is a good representation of what we're talking about, right? So here we have let's go with the same TCS Tata Group example. So this is a high-level route management group. And within that, we have multiple different companies of Tata. Imagine this is Tata Steel, Tata Software, Tata some other group. And within this particular company, there might be some more management group, right? Or it could directly be a division or a subscription by itself. And why we organize this way, this is nothing technical. This is just about how do we want to structure the organization's multiple different subscription, right? That's all it is, right? And why do we do this? We do this for organizing resources, taking care of security, compliance, and then making sure we are able to seamlessly bill, right? And that's our management group. It is basically organization of subscription. All right, we are at 6:42. We still have 50 minutes left, so we could go back to the questions. And if you have any questions, we could ask that now. I'll go back to the question. All right, for now, I'll go on mute.
Okay, so shall I dictate the questions?
Good.
Okay, sir. So there are a couple of questions. The one is, can we create multiple policies at the same time?
Oh yeah. That's the idea behind policies, right? Policies are not a singular one. You can't manage Azure subscription, complex Azure subscription with singular policies. You could define as many policies as you see fit, as you see required for managing your compliance. We could define them, and as we saw, we could also group them under initiatives and then assign them to a scope, whereby you could apply that initiative or a policy to a resource group or to a subscription level and handle your compliance and security requirements.
Okay. So another question is the resource group applicable for all levels of management group?
Can you repeat the question again?
Is resource group applicable for all levels of management group?
Oh, okay. So no, these are two different things. Management group is all about combining one or more subscriptions. And inside your subscription, you will have resource group, which is basically a container, let's say a bucket. And inside the resource group, you will put your resources. That's the hierarchy, right? Now, the policies can be applied at any scope level. You could apply at the management group or subscription resource group or at the resources as well. Again, we are not just restricted to what we are talking now, or what I'm sharing today. You have a whole bunch of content on MS Learn, and if you have Azure Access, I would highly recommend that you go and play with all these topics yourself. That way, you get a lot more question and a lot more exposure.
Okay, so and the question is how to identify the sandbox related tutorials.
That's a question, a good question. I may need to come back to you because I was trying to play with that sometime back. I'm sure that particular feature is still available. but I don't have that link handy. So, Aditi, if if you still have access to the question in the chat and people, I can share the link with you later, and you may share it with the team.
Okay, sure. Okay, so and the question is pricing calculator can be used for scenarios? Are there any scenarios where it is not applicable?
Oh, no, pricing calculator is a simple tool for us to calculate how much it would cost us to run services on cloud. Let's say if I want to run a simple web application, I would need some app service and let's say some databases. The calculator would tell me how much it would cost. So this is the cost, and it would also tell me by choosing a different region, I can look at the price. If I go with Linux, the prices is going to be a lot cheaper. If I want to go with premium, premium price is not available. Let's go with standard. What is the price, and thereby companies would be able to calculate on a high level how much it is going to cost for me to run the service on cloud. That's all the pricing calculator is. Most of the organization would do this exercise before they do anything on cloud.
Okay, so RBAC controls can be implemented in management groups.
Yes. Yeah. So if you are creating a custom role, or if you want to make use of the existing role, you could apply RBAC at the management group level as well. And RBAC is always inherited. So that means if you assign, let's say, a contributor role at management group level, that's the highest level. Then anything under that particular management group would automatically inherit your role.
Okay. Okay, so what is dynamic groups in Azure AD?
Okay, so Azure AD is a identity service that helps us to manage the user roles and all of that. That's totally different. But I guess the dynamic group versus the static group, I guess, we can quickly go back and check that. Azure Active Directory, we go to groups, and here we could see a group, and here you can find the different types of groups. The security group versus this, and then membership type is assigned, another one is dynamic, right? So the assigned is basically to directly assign a user to a particular group. Whereas the dynamic group is basically allows you to check a particular aspect or different type of aspect of a user. I'll go back to the same example that I discussed about, right? So let's say you have South Indian group and North Indian. Oh, sorry, bad example. Finance group versus sales group. And if you want to automatically map to this finance versus sales group based on certain properties of the user, you could choose this dynamic group so that as and when a new user with those properties gets added will be automatically assigned, and that's why it's called dynamic group. You could dynamically add users and remove users out of this group, dynamic group.
Okay. So, and the question is, can user administrator create users in Azure Active Directory, or is it only the global administrator?
Global administrator is the owner of the entire subscriptions, and hence he has everything. But the Azure AD user administrator is the exclusive role to perform this, right? Because owner doesn't do this all the time, and hence they have an exclusive role for managing user and its lifecycle. Both the users can do it, but it is generally preferred to managed by Azure AD access management role.
Okay. Is there programmatic access for Azure Active Directory?
Oh yes, oh yeah. You have. If you search for Azure AD, REST API, you will find a lot of them. So using this, you could access. So whatever we did with the portal, we could also use that with the help of the REST API. So that's a programmatic access.
Okay. Okay, so I think the questions are ended.
All right, all right. Yeah, so I can get back to Aditi with the link for the sandbox, and probably she could share the same with you later. And it's
Okay.
amazing to see all of you here. Just continue with what you set out to do, that completing Azure AD, and I would highly recommend that you come back and join the next session on the Saturday, with the next set of topics being on the storage aspects, right? And also
Yes.
look at opportunities around doing mock testings. There are plenty of services out there, and also continue your learning with MS Learn and all of the video resources available in Microsoft.
Okay, so can I have Saurav Raghuvanshi sir to go through the weekly challenge?
But before you do that, Aditi, I'll drop off the call right now.
Uh,
Is that okay?
so please be there
Oh,
just 5 to 10 minutes
sure. All
more.
right. Sure. Thank you.
Hi, Aditi. Thanks for. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Just let me share my screen. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes,
So
it
can anyone
is.
confirm? Okay, thank you. So yeah, hi everyone. So we are back with the weekly challenge. So I hope you are waiting for this a lot. So let me just dive deep into that. So this was the first weekly challenge that you all already attended. So we just seen that like couple of people have don't join the meetup page. So I would highly recommend to go ahead and join the meetup page of Azure Developer Community Dehradun. We have shared the link in the chat also, so that you can able to go ahead and join from the link itself. By this you can able to be updated about the upcoming sessions that we are planning, so it will be very much helpful for you also. Coming to the weekly challenge too, so in this challenge we wanted to take our learning into the next level so that we can able to help more people. How we can able to do is like by writing blogs. So today you are learning, so by next day, by after learning, if you can go ahead and share about your learning through blogs, it will not only help you to validate your skills, but at the same time help you other people also, your connections, everyone, to see your blog. At the same time it will definitely going to help you if you are going for a job role in cloud or a related field. So definitely blogging is a great skill. So we will recommend to go ahead and write a blog on the content that you have learned today. And by this way, what you can able to do, you can able to like go through the content once again, see the content, like makes notes, and try to write a blog. And you can also follow the MS Learn document page also, so that you can just you can dive deep into the content. This session was an overview about the topics. You need to go a little bit dive deep to understand how these every services works together. So to answer the question that is that you are expected in during the exams, if you're going to give this AZ-104 certification exam, while designing the challenge, we come to know that like they are very much active into the blogging field or these domain, but still we would highly recommend that people to try, go ahead and try this, because it will definitely going to add a new skill to your resume, new skill to your personality also. So I would highly recommend, but still, if you can't able to do it, there is another way. You can create a handwritten notes about the content that you have learned today, and you can just share it on LinkedIn. So the blog that you are also writing, you have to share it on LinkedIn itself, tagging Azure Developer Community and Whizlabs, who is partnering with us. So you can tag them, and or also there is a third option that you can write a brief description about what all you have studied in this session with like 1-2 highlighters as a LinkedIn post also. So why we are doing this? So that like, because in the last session, the challenge that we had, you just write about, okay, you have attended session, but it is not very much helpful to the people who are seeing your post. So we want to make the content like whatever the post you are writing, helpful for the others also. So if you go ahead and write about the content, like let's say you studied about the groups, right? What is groups? So it will definitely going to add a value to the your connection, and at the same time it will help people that okay, you are just not attending session but also learning it. So that will definitely going to very much helpful. Once again I will iterate, we are going to prefer people who are going to write blogs. That is pretty much clear about it. So and make sure after writing the blog you share the link on LinkedIn by tagging Azure Developer Community Whizlabs. You can tag us also, tag me, Aditi, and the team also. So that will be like we can able to look into it. And the second option is if you're not very much comfortable with the blog, you can write a paper based notes or a LinkedIn post covering all the topic that you have learned. And while writing the post, make sure that you are not copying each other content, because we are definitely going to check the plagiarism for distribution of the vouchers, the Azure passes, goodies, and everything. So we are going to do that. So make sure your content is unique. Now coming to the next, like we have a great announcement for you guys. After seeing the last session as a great success, we thought about like let's make it a little bit more fun learning. So now what we are going to do is we are going to announce the goodies winner from Microsoft on a weekly basis. So let's say we are launching the challenge on this week. So next week we will be having winners, let's say 7-8 winners for this challenge, and we are going to give the goodies by the next week only. So we are not going to wait until the last session. You can able to grab the goodies and these things from each session onward. So if you are going to attend the today's session and if your blogs is going to be very good, we are definitely try to provide you with the goodies. But for the certification vouchers, for the passes, you have to wait till the end of this boot camp. So we are going to announce the certification passes winner and the vouchers winner at the end of the bootcamp, but the goodies winner will be announced each and every week. So this is the discussion that we had internally, and we come up with this solution. I hope it going to boost you all and motivation to go ahead and write the blog and make it unique, make it very much readable to the your target audience or the LinkedIn connection that you have. So, and we will also try to get your blog posted on Reskill. And if you on that platform, if your blog is going to be very good, Microsoft will going to add that blog in a newsletter, Microsoft newsletter, monthly newsletter that they launch. Your blog may get added. I'm not guaranteed, but yeah, definitely it can get added if your blog will going to be good. So we are going to submit all the blogs that we are going to get to the Reskill page, so that they can take it forward to adding it on their blog channel as well as Microsoft newsletter. So we can try that, and definitely it's going to boost a lot to you guys, and it's going to add a lot of skills in your resume if your blog is going to be featured on Reskill page or a Microsoft page. So it will be going to add a lot of value. So that's about the announcement. Once again, I would like to thank the team who is working a lot each and every day, from the content creation to getting everything done before the session. So that is about the team. So with this note, I would like to conclude this presentation and this session. I would like to give it back to Aditi once again. Aditi, over to you.
Thank you, Saurav. So, can we have Ilyas sir back?
Yeah, just a minute.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes. So, thank you so much, sir, for this insightful session. It was amazing. I hope the audience will love it. And it was awesome. anything you wanted to add at the end of the session?
No, I would like to thank everyone who spent 2 hours, quality 2 hours with us. Just continue your upskilling, and we need more people to work on a lot of different challenges on Azure and cloud in general. So don't just stop with this learning. Also go ahead and complete the certification as well. And I would like to thank you and Raghav for doing the fantastic job.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Everyone,
Once
have a
once
great
again,
night.
I would like to, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so once again, I would like to thanks all the team who is working a lot for the content creation to everything, and also the member on who are attending this session on Saturday evening. So thanks a lot, everyone. We are hoping to see you with the great blog content, and we are going to see you on next Saturday. So thank you.
Thanks and bye.